Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the webinar, How Import Compliance Ties into FDA Compliance, your checklist to prepare for 2021. Our speakers today are Jennifer Diaz of Diaz Trade Law and David Wilson of Reed Tech. Jennifer Diaz is a Chambers ranked, board certified international attorney, as well as the president and founder of Diaz Trade Law and Diaz Trade Consulting, specializing in customs and international trade law and U.S. agent services. As an expert in matters concerning U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, Jennifer regularly provides customized trainings on import-export compliance for numerous organizations and small and large businesses, including several Fortune 500 companies. Jennifer is a frequent media contributor, author, and editor of a prominent customs and international trade law blog, and author of the Top 10 Tips When Importing Exporting. David Wilson, a senior account executive at Reed Tech, assists pharmaceutical companies to achieve compliance through innovative technologies. Reed Tech serves customers with the expertise required in the life sciences industry. The services and software tools provided as part of the pharmaceutical services have assisted over 1,000 pharmaceutical companies in complying with complex FDA electronic drug listing, labeling, and registration requirements. Today, Jennifer and David will be discussing the following topics: compliant importation, FDA compliance and submission, how import compliance affects FDA compliance, and how to be prepared and audit ready for 2021. At the end, we will have a question and answer session. So please make sure if you do have any questions throughout the presentation that you just type them into the questions box, and we will get to as many as we can today and follow up with anyone we may not get to. So with that, I will hand the presentation off to you, Jen.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and excited to learn more about all of our attendees. Normally, we love to do in-person presentations, but welcome to COVID. We now have webinars. So in order to keep you engaged and interactive, we have polls. So why don't we get started with the first one?
Absolutely. So I'm going to launch the first poll question here. And if everyone could just take a second and let us know your answer. So the first poll question that you should be able to see on your screen is your company new to importing? So I do see we've already had about 59% of attendees answer. So we'll give it just about another 15 or 20 seconds.
Perfect. And the reason we want to know whether or not you're new or not new to importing is we can tailor this presentation as much as possible to those of you that are new or are older and more experienced in importers as well. There's a 101 and a 201 version. So want to get a glimpse on how basic and or detailed and advanced we want to take this today.
Okay, so I'm going to close the poll. And it looks like we have 14% of our viewers are new to importing, but 80% are not.
All right. Well, all right. For the 80%, you're going to have some basic terms as well, because we want everyone to get as much out of today as possible. So for those of you that are new to importing, thanks for letting us know. So today, what we're going to be going over are top 10 tips when importing, which I've compiled over my last 15 years of practicing as a customs and international trade attorney. I've compiled best practices and tips into cheat sheets because I love cheat sheets. I love handy dandy tools that we can utilize and that can summarize key factors, and you can take them home, take them to work, share them with others and such. So the top 10 tips are boiled down into what's on your screen right now, or the top 5, and we're going to go over all of them in more detail. So this is an outline of them in terms of where to start. The idea behind this is for those that are new and for those that are older to importing, for those that are more experienced, these are still the top ideas and the top issues that you have to have in place and the top solutions that you have to make sure you actually have solutions to in your business when you're importing. So to start with, we're going to talk about knowing your product, knowing who your supplier is, and which government agencies regulate you. And that'll be another fun poll that we'll create at the time, because there are so many government agencies that can potentially regulate you that you don't think of. And when it comes to knowing your supplier, if you're not the supplier, we hear about way too often, and there are all sorts of fun horror stories that we can share along the way in terms of why everything that's on our cheat sheet comes with a story. When it comes to the supplier, the reason that that's really important is a lot of people order online these days. We see a whole lot of that. So if you're ordering, for example, from Alibaba, you have no idea who your supplier is. We wind up seeing all sorts of interesting issues in that regard. And some of the interesting issues are you don't know who they are. You don't know that you're getting a compliant importation when you're ordering from a supplier that you don't know. You know nothing about them. And they could be sending you counterfeit goods. They could be sending you subpar goods that have bad quality issues or so on, and you know nothing about whether or not they really are, who the manufacturer is and such. So I will tell a story about one of my clients, their first importation. Imagine you're brand new, it's your first importation. In their instance, they really didn't do a lot of due diligence with the supplier. It was a brand new supplier to them. They really didn't think much about it. First importation, right? It was an adorable motorcycle, right? So motorcycle also had candy inside of it. Delicious. And what do you think of when you think of a cute little motorcycle with candy? It's geared towards children. So in this instance, when it comes to the product, they didn't really do homework on the product. So when it comes to the product, can you imagine how many federal government agencies regulate this particular product, David? Take a wild guess. Even you, somebody who knows about imports, you have a cute motorcycle, you have candy in the motorcycle, and when you have candy in a cute motorcycle, who do you think it's geared towards? Kids, right? So
Yep.
now, how many federal government agencies do you think regulate this cute little motorcycle?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking maybe, 5 seems reasonable, right?
3. So it's good. It's always good to overestimate. So we always
All
have
right,
U.S.
good.
Customs. So U.S. Customs, we're going to talk about a whole lot today. U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They're at 329 ports of entries guarding our borders. And then for the food, you know who we have, David. Who's our agency?
Our friends at the FDA.
Absolutely. The Food and Drug Administration for sure for food. But then when you have a toy product for kids, you have the Consumer Product Safety Commission as well, and that's the spoiler. So for our wonderful first-time importer, our client wound up having food issues with the FDA because there were colors in the food that were not approved colors that he never should have been able to trust from his supplier. So FDA wasn't happy with the food. Consumer Product Safety Commission wasn't happy with the motorcycle because the cute little handlebars could pop right off and cause a choking hazard for kids. Not good. So we had a Consumer Product Safety Commission issue. And U.S. Custom wasn't happy because the cute little motorcycle had stickers, like Harley, for example. Harley's not very happy when you have a sticker for Harley when you don't have authorization. So now we have a trademark issue, we have an FDA food safety issue, and then we have a small parts hazard for Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is why I tell this story in regards to knowing your product, supplier, and who regulates you, because had this particular importer done a little homework before, and we call that pre-compliance, prior to importation, had he picked up the phone and said, "Hi, Jen, I'm thinking about importing this cute little motorcycle. What do you think?" And we would say, "Oh, did you see all these stickers on there? Did you review your intellectual property rights?" Which is also our number 2. And did you actually do a review of the agencies that are going to be involved in this? Did you think about FDA for the actual food product? And I see some colors here. We would have talked about that. We would have talked about Consumer Product Safety Commission as well. So throughout the slides, we're going to talk a lot more about intellectual property rights, and we're also going to talk about a term called reasonable care. The idea behind reasonable care is U.S. Customs has shifted the burden onto importers, which means if you're going to import, it's really easy to start. Nobody really talks about the juicy details behind importing, but let's say you want to start importing. You can order something online today and voila, you're an importer. But if the value of that importation is over $2,500 and it's a commercial importation, you actually have to file an entry with customs. To do that, you need a bond and you need a broker. Sometimes you're using those big carriers like UPS, FedEx, DHL, perfectly fine. You're still signing a power of attorney and you're subject to UPS, FedEx, and DHL's, for example, terms and conditions. Typically, there are all sorts of smaller brokers as well to utilize where you get a little bit more personal customized service, especially if you're just starting out. So something to consider, a pro tip. But the obligation of the importer is to ensure that you, via your broker, are providing customs with accurate information about your importations. So it's very easy to start importing, and it's also very easy to get into trouble when you're importing. Hence, the idea behind these top 10 tips is things that you should be thinking about within your supply chain, whether you're new or whether you're an experienced importer, because your obligation to US Customs as an importer is to use reasonable care. So we're going to talk about exactly what that means. And you're going to be using reasonable care in regards to classification, valuation, country of origin, free trade agreements, intellectual property. These are all of our top items itself that we're going to make sure that you understand by the end of this. So in the next slide, we talk about the last 6 top 10 tips. And then if you get notices from customs, we'll talk about what you actually do about those notices and how they're not friendly notices. Unfortunately, in any of these instances, the government is not your friend. So all of these tips we're going to go over in more detail so that they're clear to you. And then you're going to get this presentation at the end so you have the nice summary as well. And we're also going to give you some fun cheat sheets and tools as well. Let's go to our next poll question.
So for now, I'm going to launch the second poll question. So does your company have an individual, internal or external, that is tasked with compliance?
Now, the reason this is really important is I just mentioned reasonable care, for example. The idea behind reasonable care is that somebody is actually responsible for the task of ensuring that your company is utilizing reasonable care. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's important to think of who is going to be your responsible individual, because your company itself, as an importer of whatever items, whether they're medical devices, foods, drugs, any item whatsoever that you are importing, we need to make sure that you are advising US Customs of your importations utilizing reasonable care. That's our standard or your burden. So let's see those results and see if you have, who's the actual compliance person within your company. Let's see if you have people internally, externally, or if this concept is completely new to you.
And I'll add to that, part of the main reason of having Jennifer join us today is the fact that many of us may be accustomed to that FDA requirement. But as you add the complexity of now importing a product, what we've learned through preparing this presentation with Jennifer is it's a lot more complicated than you may have previously thought. So we thought this would be a great topic to review.
Perfect. I love these results. It's very interesting that most of you are actually internally assisting with compliance. So now what we're going to have and we're going to go through is kind of the checklist of things that internal person is doing. So this will be your good toolkit for 2021 to make sure that internally the person who's handling compliance, and whether or not it's you or someone else in your company, is doing a great job. And they have all their I's dotted and T's crossed, and everything that they really need to think about, they are thinking about. And then you can think about them because it's right before the holidays, and this is perfect bonus and raise time. It could be a really, really great job compliance person. And then for those of you that are not sure, you don't have a person, this is the time to really think about 2021 coming up. And it's time to assign somebody this task, whether it's internally or externally. Your job is to have an expert on board within your company, and it can be external to your company, who's responsible for everything we talk about today. So the first item is who regulates you, which we talked about in our example story of the cute little motorcycle with candy in it, right? So now we're thinking a lot about COVID related items, right? David and I, and I'm sure a lot of you on the phone today, have talked so much about PPE, right? We've talked about gloves, masks, and all sorts of sanitizers and so on. So we're thinking a lot more about EPA these days, especially when you're making cleaning claims and you're trying to kill microbes on the surface, right? So if you're trying to use disinfectants and you're trying to make claims that you can kill COVID on every surface by using your product, now we have EPA in the mix as well. We have the Federal Trade Commission. David and I were sharing stories as well, and some of you may have known about L'Oreal's case. This was a juicy case because who doesn't like anti-aging products, right? None of us want to age. Who wants to look older, right? That industry is such a wonderful industry with billions and billions of products sold and dollars worth of products sold because nobody wants to age, right? So it's similar to Cheerios getting in trouble, right? I'm going to lower your cholesterol if you eat Cheerios. Do you really think it's true that eating Cheerios will lower your cholesterol? No, that's not the case, right? So how do you get in trouble for making those claims? And the important aspect is FDA will always monitor your claims, but the Federal Trade Commission additionally is another watchful eye over you because their job is to protect consumers from misleading claims. So FDA is going to regulate you from a standpoint of you have to be truthful and not misleading in your labeling to your consumers. And FTC will additionally make sure that you're doing the same. So L'Oreal actually got in trouble with FTC for anti-aging claims and discussing how their beautiful beauty products were going to make you look 10 years younger and they were going to make sure you didn't age anymore. It's not really possible. Minus surgery, we know it's not possible. So it's wonderful to say, for example, we have tricks when it comes to cosmetic products. We do a lot of cosmetic labeling reviews. Within those reviews, of course, there are anti-aging products, and of course, we want to purchase them as consumers, right? But you're altering the appearance. So you always want to go back to the actual definitions of what FDA regulates and how they actually regulate. And you want to understand where the lines are and how to work through those particular claims. Yes, you can make claims, but if they're not appropriate claims, you can easily go in from what we call cosmetic land to drug land. So every single product has different regulations. So FDA, you think of for food, you think of for cosmetics, you think of for medical devices, for radiation emitting products, as well as tobacco. And under the food land, you think of dietary supplements as well. USDA, you also should be thinking of for agricultural products, for example. All of these agencies, there are over 40 federal government agencies that regulate imports and exports. It's a lot. So David, your guess on 5, for example, for the motorcycle product is not an absurd guess because there are so many agencies that can be involved in a particular product. If you deal with seafood, you may be dealing with NOAA, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as customs, for example. So it's very important to think, number one, what is my product? Did I do any due diligence at all on my supplier? And which government agencies do I have to worry about making sure that I comply with? For example, if you're dealing with alcohol, you should be getting a permit from the Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Trade Bureau before importing, as well as registering with the US FDA as a food facility, because somebody's going to be drinking that alcohol. So for alcohol, you're dealing with FDA, TTB, and US Customs. It's another great example of a product with 3 federal government agencies that regulates it. So hopefully that's clear and makes sense. If you do have questions as you go, feel free to type them in the chat box, and then we can go on to the next slide. Another big issue that we're seeing quite a bit of these days is anti-dumping and countervailing duties. This is an incredibly important topic. As we'll talk about soon, there are priority trade initiatives from Customs, meaning what is US Customs spending a lot of time and a lot of money enforcing? Those are the issues that we as importers want to make sure that we're on top of. So the fun question is, if you've never heard of anti-dumping or countervailing duties, hopefully your product has nothing to do with it and isn't subject to it, but something you may not have known. Monosodium glutamate, that's an anti-dumping issue, right? There are lots of investigations that come up for all sorts of products all of the time. For example, aluminum foil, barium chloride. There are lots of products. We deal with wooden bedroom furniture, pencils, receipt paper, all sorts of things that you never would think of. So an example of this is we were helping an importer who ordered receipt paper online and from one of his Chinese vendors, right? Next thing you know, they're getting a notice from Customs saying, did you pay anti-dumping duties here? You did not. You're in trouble, buddy. And we had to go through what was called a prior disclosure at the time, because here's the deal. If your product is on an anti-dumping list and subject to anti-dumping, but you didn't do the research to figure that out before importing the product, you could be subject to penalties. And that's the juicy portion that's really difficult to understand if you really don't even know about anti-dumping. So this is kind of an 8-ball that's been thrown at a whole lot of people that didn't think of receipt paper, pencils, aluminum foil, so I'm letting you know that this is a major issue, and it's not just China. A lot of us would automatically assume, oh, this has to be part of our, war with China. This predates our war with China, for example, in our trade war. And this is something that's been going on for many years. The idea behind anti-dumping is to protect US producers of similar products who can't sell their products because they're being undercut by foreign producers and by importers who are selling at a lower margin. Bottom line is it's something that everybody should have on their audit checklist is, did I at least review anti-dumping to make sure that my products are not subject to it? So if this is on your checklist, I'm super proud of you. Next slide, and it's another poll.
Yeah, Jen,
go ahead,
quick
David.
question before we get into the next poll is in regards to these 49 different federal agencies that may be regulating and requiring different items. With FDA, a lot of us on the line may be familiar with some of their electronic drug and even device registration requirements and the annual requirements. Out of these other agencies, how many of them are typically having like an annual requirement that you have to abide by versus those that are make sure you have this registration or information in before you start importing?
Most of them are actually make sure you have this in place before. It's not necessarily the renewal process like FDA.
Right.
FDA is big on renewals, and they're actually smart about it. Because imagine at the beginning, the Bioterrorism Act started many years ago. So for food registrations, they had, almost 500,000 food facilities. And then it's been 10 plus years and they never made anybody re-register. So what FDA realized is they have all of these companies that may or may not still exist. Yeah. So now you have the biennial registration for food facility registrations just to make sure you're still in business and that your company information is the same. Because what happens? Companies change, ownership changes, addresses change. Are you actually reporting those changes to the FDA is really what FDA cares about. So they're really smart about making you re-register over and over and confirm that there are no changes to your product for product safety reasons. For example, USDA, you may need a permit every importation. So it's similar, but it's not like you have it for the life. When it comes to some export permits, you similarly have them for a period of time and then you have to renew them. So the annoying portion here is every agency has different requirements. Like TTB, when you get an alcohol permit, you get the permit, good to go. And then it's just a matter of, do you need a new permit from a new company or something like that? TTB just cares about you paying your excise taxes as you go, and that's your annual requirement. So every agency is just a little bit different to add a little bit of fun to the mix. And God forbid every agency would be on the same webpage in one place to actually look at. You've got to understand all of these different agencies have their own websites and their own requirements. And you actually have to be smart enough to figure out where to go for all of them and or to have an expert internally or externally assist you with that process.
Right. Great, thanks.
Let's check out our next poll.
Absolutely. I'm going to launch this one right now. And this is an easy one. We'll only leave it open for about 30 seconds. So does your company have its own brand?
So the reason we're going to talk about your own brand is for intellectual property rights. US Customs has a really cool program that unfortunately I don't think gets enough credit. The idea behind it is US Customs acts as your own company's personal policeman at the border. Extremely cool, I think. And the idea behind this program is you have to have your own brand and you have to have your brand registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So for those of you that do have your own brand that did select yes, I'd like you to type in the chat box and USPT, perfect. So for 91% of you that have your own brand, I would love to see you type in the chat box and Aaron will tell us how many of you have actually registered your brand with USPTO. So also type yes in the chat box if you have a brand registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Would love to understand that as well. And the reason that's important is because after you register your brand with the USPTO, we can go to the next slide, then US Customs has the ability to actually help you at the border ensure that nobody's messing with your brand, right? So let's say David has his own brand, Wilson Brands, right? So let's pretend Wilson Brands is registered with the USPTO. Now comes along Jen, this mean counterfeiter, and I'm putting together a Wilson brand substitute product that's identical to David's product, and I'm trying to undercut him and trying to sell him his type of product on Amazon, right? Well, US Customs will ask David, when he actually records his trademark with Customs, David, do you know of any mean counterfeiters out there trying to mess with you? And you're going to be like, yeah, this Jen's been driving me nuts on Amazon, right? Let's get her out of the picture here. And they're going to say, all right, US Customs is going to say, David, well, where do you manufacture your products? And he's going to say, oh, China. And then where does Jen? Oh, she's from China too. So that makes it a little harder because we can't just look for a specific country. That's the problem, right? They're both China. But then David has a box where he can list any authorized distributors of his product. It's not me. I'm not authorized. I'm on the bad list. And then he can tell Customs any juicy information he knows about me, where I'm importing, where I'm located, my company name, or any juicy details about my company, so Customs can target me. So for my next importation, if David has actually taken the time to record a registered trademark with US Customs, Customs polices David's brand, so they act like a policeman at the border. They'll stop my bad counterfeit importation. They'll seize my products. They'll also tell David that they've done some police work on his behalf, so David separately can come after me with a cease and desist notice. And then on top of that, Customs will issue me a fine, a penalty for messing with David. It's a pretty great program, and US Customs only charges $190 for 10 years worth of protection. And it's a minuscule fee for that type of enforcement. You can't pay a policeman that much to do some private investigation work on your behalf. So what we do, for example, is we protect brands and we do searches to make sure. So for those of you, for the 9% of you that don't have a brand protected, if you do have a brand, if you decide to get a brand in the future, the way to protect that brand is to make sure that you're not infringing on anyone else's brand, right? How bad would that stink? We've had clients, for example, where they create this cool design, they have a marketing team, make a beautiful logo, they start selling products, and all of a sudden they start getting some mean notices from competitors saying, buddy, that's my brand. I have it registered. Why are you using my brand? I want you to get all your product off the market, and I want you to start paying me because I have some damages here because you're profiting off of my brand. That stinks. You do not want that to happen at all. So when you have your own brand, the first thing to do is a search to make sure you're not messing with anybody else. So it should go from concept to search to implementation. That's the right pathway, so you never wind up spending buku bucks on product or marketing that you have to throw in the trash after the fact. Then you register your brand, and then you record your registered brand with Customs. That's a beautiful IP program. So that should be on your checklist for those of you that do have a brand. Now you know all of the different steps. So the next slide is what it looks like if you actually want to see other companies that have taken the time and energy to protect their IPR, intellectual property rights, with US Customs. So this is on our top 10 tips cheat sheet that you'll get at the end. So you'll have your own, and I'll show you exactly where to download. So you can go to this link as well. This is US Customs IPRS, their intellectual property rights search system. So for example, these are some marks that we have recorded with Customs. So now if you ever wanted to check this out, you could see, oh, wait a minute, I really shouldn't be making, using Darrell Lee's mark for my licorice because Darrell Lee has already recorded their trademark with US Customs. So if I use Darrell Lee's name on my licorice, I'm going to be screwed. Customs is going to police it and take my product and potentially issue me a penalty after the fact too. Hopefully that makes sense. Perfect. Let's head on to our next poll question.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So our next poll question is, a knowledge check. So I'm going to launch this now. Manufacturer is responsible for the payment of customs duties. Is that true or false?
So for those of you that are importing, it's going back to our reasonable care checklist. So that's what we're going to be talking about next. What I want you as importers to walk away with today is, what is your obligation to U.S. Customs, and what is your obligation in terms of your internal compliance that you should have in place, or external compliance for those of you that have experts outside? So let's see what the answers are.
All right, so I'm going to close the poll now.
Perfect. All right, so 64% of you are correct. Now, the only trick is, this is a trick question, it depends on your Incoterm. So how many of you know what Incoterms are? You can type that in the chat box, a yes or a no, we can get a feel. The idea behind an Incoterm is it's where the risk of loss passes from the seller to the buyer. So the only way that that answer should have been true for those 34% of you is if you have negotiated with your supplier a DDP Incoterm, meaning the manufacturer, or it could be your supplier if you're dealing with the manufacturer directly, is delivering the item to your door. If you have a DDP Incoterm, then yes, the manufacturer would be responsible for the U.S. Customs process, including the actual entry and the payment of duties. Otherwise, the 64% of you are 100% right. All the other Incoterms mean that the buyer is responsible for the import process and the payment of duties. So good job. Hopefully for all of you, maybe the 34% of you are lucky in that you were able to negotiate with your supplier to deliver it directly to your door. And if you're not, then you should think about Incoterms. And that's who's responsible for what, the buyer or the seller. And that's a whole nother class. So let's check out the next slide, which talks about our reasonable care checklist. So this is also in your top 10 tips cheat sheet. And this is general for all transactions. This checklist is about 15 pages long on the cheat sheet. So you'll be able to see as they have questions related to all the topics we're talking about today. But generally, there are 4 top questions that I want you to think of when you think about your 2021 audit plan and your 2021 compliance plan. Number 1, do you have an expert internally or externally? So I think over 80% of you said that you do have expertise in-house. Wonderful. Now I want you to make sure you have the right expert in-house that really does have the knowledge and is the right person to assist you. So now, number 2, is that person responsible, knowledgeable? Does this person know U.S. Customs laws and requirements? Does this person have access to U.S. Customs regulations? Do they know that they're in Title 19 Code of Federal Regulations for Customs regulations? Do they know where the harmonized tariff schedule, for example, is? Do they know how to review cross rulings from U.S. Customs? If they don't know any of these things, we have to talk. Let's go to the third, number 3 and 4. So when it comes to this expert, does this expert actually have your, for example, commercial invoice information? Do they know about your product? Do they have accurate, complete information about your supplier? Do they know details about who should be in charge of that particular product, meaning which government agencies regulate that particular product? Is this person an expert in all those areas? And a juicy question, number 4, which we're going to get into, how do you actually audit to make sure that you're providing consistent information to customs? We're going to talk about ACE soon. So do you have identical transactions that you handle differently depending on different ports, for example? If so, that's not good. You want to make sure you're consistent throughout. So generally, when you think about any issue with U.S. Customs, the thing that you should always be thinking about is the right person managing this particular risk and this compliance task? Does this person have the knowledge to manage this task? Do they have the resources to assist me with this task? And are we handling this task the same regardless of which port we enter this merchandise in? So when it comes to the next slide, your actual classification, you may know of the harmonized tariff schedule. So what we have for you is another cheat sheet, is especially for PPE right now, because PPE is a really, really hot topic. So we published an article in Bloomberg, and we had a whole lot of resources within that article. One of them is one of my favorites is HTS classifications that were provided by the World Trade Organization. So if you notice the HTS classification on the cheat sheet on your right-hand screen, this deals with gloves, masks, sanitizer, and so on, and it has all the appropriate harmonized tariff schedules for all of the different PPE related items that you could possibly think of. It's a terrific cheat sheet. So we'll be giving you access to this as well. So you can have access to all of these harmonized tariff codes. The importance behind a classification under the harmonized tariff schedule is how much you're going to pay in duties, right? US Customs collects trillions of dollars worth of revenue via customs duties. So when you want to know what your product classification is, the real reason is how much am I going to spend in customs duties? So we have an example for you on the left-hand screen of the harmonized tariff schedule. So something else I want you to pay close attention to. You see where it says 2020 revision 28? Do you see that, David, on the top? 28. That means this is the 28th version of this harmonized tariff schedule this year alone, and we're towards the end of the year. The important thing that I want you to think of is your expert familiar with the harmonized tariff schedule and all of these crazy revisions? Because your classification could change in the same year multiple times. It's possible. So the person who's in charge of making sure they know who your classification is, and an important point I want to bring up, we hear quite a lot, well, that's what I have a customs broker for. What I want to make you acutely aware of is if you solely have your customs broker responsible for picking this classification, it's not your broker who's responsible to use reasonable care in ascertaining the classification. It's you as the importer. So if your broker is wrong, it's not your broker who gets in trouble, it's you as the importer, which is why it's very important for you as the importer to ensure you're using the right classification. So if your broker helps you, I'm okay with that. But you have to know how to review this and how to confirm that it's okay. So what we did was on the right-hand side, you can see the COVID cheat sheet for the different products and the classification. Now, something you're going to notice is the World Trade Organization gave you 6 digits of a code of the harmonized tariff schedule. But in the United States, it's 10 digits. The reason they gave you 6 is 6 digits are actually the same throughout the world. Isn't it nice? So the world actually shares the first 6 digits of the harmonized tariff classification. So another cheat sheet tip is to ask your supplier on your commercial invoice to include the harmonized tariff schedule, even if they just include the first 6 digits. That's extremely helpful for you, because then you can go to the left-hand side of the screen, which is the actual harmonized tariff schedule. And the cool part about this is it's a searchable database. So this is on your cheat sheet as well on your top 10 tips. This is number 4 on your top 10 tips. You'll have the HTS website link, which is the interactive link. So you can type in any item. You can type in the numbers. You can type in mask. You can type in whatever search criteria you want. So for example, 9020 is for breathing apparatuses and gas masks, for example. And you'll see on the right side, gas masks with mechanical parts or replaceable filters for protection against COVID, right? So that's our 9020. So if you want to see what it is on the left, then it's underwater breathing apparatuses is the 4,000 at the end, or other breathing apparatuses and gas masks is 6,000, or it's not for underwater, it's not a breathing apparatus, then it's other. Dependent upon which one you pick, you'll see under general, you'll see the rate of duty. So for example, for an underwater breathing apparatus, the duty is free. But if it's a breathing apparatus that's other and a gas mask, it's 2.5% duty. And if it's other and not one of those, then it's also 2.5% duty. Another very, very hot topic we get is via the trade war with China, does this have an extra tax on it, which is the extra 25%, for example, for the majority of products. In this case, after general, if their product was subject to China tariffs, you would see another line. Like right after free, it would have the same as the question mark, whatever that line is, and the same key as the question mark. David, help me. That slash, that backslash, or on a keyboard, if you look at the question mark, like that same little slash. So next to free, it would have a little slash, and on that slash, you'd get a number that would pop up. That would tell you if you're subject to China tariffs. So this is a great way to know that the US government, United States trade representatives, have looked at PPE related items, and they took them off of the China tariff list because these particular masks, they're not subject to additional China tariffs. So if you're importing from China, no additional tariffs. The other thing I want you to note is the special column on the harmonized tariff. Under the special column, you'll see a lot of letters, and those letters are all hyperlinks. Those all refer to free trade agreements, which is the next thing we'll talk about as well when we get into country of origin and free trade agreements. So if it's typically 2.5%, it's actually free if you're using one of our free trade agreement partners. So things that I want you to keep in mind. The next slide talks about country of origin. The reason country of origin is important is it has to deal with what we just talked about, how much duty you're going to spend dependent upon the country that is actually making your product. So two important tips. One is the country that the supplier of yours is in, where you're physically getting the product from, is not automatically the country of origin. So let's say a Chinese manufacturer sends a product to Thailand. If you purchase it from a Taiwanese supplier, that does not make the product made in Thailand. It's still, the product is made in China, so the origin of the product does not transfer to the buyer, you know? So for example, if the product was really made in China and the Chinese supplier sends it to the United States and then I sell it to somebody in Latin America, it's not a made in the US product just because I received it. You didn't do anything to it. The country of origin is really the country of manufacture, the country where the article was substantially transformed. This becomes a very juicy item and a hotly contested item when you're thinking of a product that has a lot of different ingredients. Think of a cake with the eggs, the flour, the butter. If the eggs, flour, and butter are from 3 different countries, and you send those 3 products to the United States, and that's where you're making the cake, you're transforming the eggs, flour, and butter into a cake in the United States. So you're really making it in the US. Well, this is a hot issue, for example, with dietary supplements, right? So you have different products. The one dietary supplement has a whole lot of ingredients. We had a hotly contested issue with, is the encapsulation location good enough? Is the dietary supplement transformed when it's encapsulated? So what Customs has that is really a beautiful program is called a binding ruling program. The idea, and what's on your screen, for example, is you have a complex issue, you send the issue to US Customs, and US Customs responds back with a binding letter, meaning you're using reasonable care. Remember our checklist word, reasonable care. So your expert internally is saying, wait a minute, I think we have a country of origin question. We want confirmation. You can get confirmation from US Customs by writing a letter to US Customs. Now, my recommendation is if you're writing this letter from Customs, you better know what you want and you better know what you're asking for, because this is binding, meaning you don't get to rip it up and not comply with it if you're not happy with it at the end, right? We have had that happen too. Not good. Customer comes to us and says, I got a letter from Customs. I'm not happy with it, so I'm just not going to use it, okay? Not okay. Not okay. So you have to be very careful with what you ask for, because once you get Customs response back, it's not toilet paper. You can't just dump it in the trash and say, I don't want to follow it. I don't like it. So you really argue, and we get very persuasive in our requests. So in our requests, we would say we make a dietary supplement out of all of these ingredients, and the API, for example, is in X country. Don't you agree, Customs, that the dietary supplement really should be country of origin X? So something that's important to think of when you think of country of origin, especially if you're dealing with, for example, government contracts and you have to comply with specific terms for country of origin in specific countries. Valuation is our next slide, and that becomes important only if you're really dealing with related parties. Otherwise, it's very simple. The value you report to Customs is the value on your commercial invoice, how much you're paying for the merchandise when you're purchasing it from an overseas supplier. So David is selling Jen whatever, Wilson brand basketballs, right? I'm buying the basketballs from David. David's selling the basketballs to me for $100,000. I report $100,000 to customs as the value. I pay duty based upon the value reported to customs, and the classification of those basketballs will tell me the duty rate. So it's value times duty rate equals the total amount of customs duties that I'm sending. You wind up saying duty quite a bit in my line of work. Perfect. Let's go to the next slide, which takes us to our next poll question.
Great, and we have another knowledge check here. So the U.S. has 15 free trade agreements in place. Is this true or false? Okay, and again, this is a pretty easy one, so we'll give you guys about 10, 15 more seconds to answer before we move right along.
Perfect. The idea behind free trade agreements is we have a couple of tools that I want to show you, so we won't take too long on free trade agreements because I'm not sure how many of you actually utilize them. But your audit checklist tool and your thought process here should be, okay, so a lot of you, we have to school you on free trade agreements, which is good. So let's go to the next one. So the next slide, this is a toolkit that you can use when it comes to free trade agreements. I like this particular tool to tell you which of our free trade agreement partners we have in place and whether your particular classification, your item is duty-free from this actual country. So let's go to the next slide and you can actually see all of the countries that we have free trade agreements in place with. This is also on your top 10 tips cheat sheet. So we have 21 countries that the US has free trade agreements in place with. It's quite a bit. It's impressive. So as you're thinking about sourcing, especially if you're new to importing, I highly encourage you to first look at these particular countries first, because we have good relationships with these countries and beneficial duties with these particular countries. Perfect. Let's go on to the next. Now for the top 10 tips cheat sheet that I've been referencing, you can download it for free on our website, Diaz Trade Law, and you'll see where the red arrow is. So once you're on diaztradelaw.com, you click the top 10 tips when importing, exporting, and the PDF will prop right up. So today we've talked about the importing side. The cheat sheet online also has exporting top tips as well. So you get the benefit of both of those. All right, we're going to move right along to the next section. So David, take it away.
Thanks, Jen. And really the next portion here is really going to summarize some of the FDA compliance piece. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of the FDA side is set in the form of annual registrations, annual certifications. And really what we focus on here primarily at ReadTech is that drug and device side of the business. And when going over a lot of these concepts and topics, we went to Jen because we were like, all right, Jen, you fill in a lot of the other gaps here. Let's put our heads together. And so as we go through some of these are really meant to help stress the importance of some of these. And Jen is then going to wrap a lot of this up into, how can we ensure this FDA compliance along with the import perspective. So typically what we see, one of the main items and aspects of, especially when it comes to import, are the facilities that are manufacturing these products properly registered. So this has to be done on an annual basis. And with FDA, we are in that window today. So from October 1st to December 31st, all manufacturers have to do their annual facility establishment registration. It can be a simple process.
Have a US agent if you're a foreign facility.
Absolutely. And it can be a simple process, but if you think about it, when an organization has multiple locations, multiple sites of import, maybe even in some scenarios, they could have different US agents or different agents that may act at the different health authorities they work with. So coordinating that can be critical. When it comes to food and dietary supplements, we've even seen organizations who have drug listed and registered their dietary supplements for different reasons. So once you're registering that dietary supplement as a drug product, you are now subject to some of those same requirements that a human prescription drug may be following from that certification perspective. And then when it comes to the drug listing updates and annual certifications, it's sometimes a little more complex than just, all right, has our facility changed? Nope. Update, right? There could be, if you're a manufacturer who manages some of your drug listings for your distributors, it can get more and more complicated as things change. So when we're looking at products that are consumer goods, over-the-counter drugs, a lot of times it's an industry practice to have a manufacturer manage that for a private label distributor. Well, one of the main things that will always happen for a product that's imported is that third bullet under manufacturer's listing. A drug product or an over-the-counter drug product manufactured under contract. Both of those drug listings have to be in place for a product to be allowed in to the United States by customs. And then when it comes to distributors, a lot of the distributors we work with manage that process themselves. So coordinating those efforts with whether it be the manufacturer themselves, their US agent like Jennifer, in ensuring that, well, when you're doing your facility registrations, are you still importing to all these importers? Should we trim that a bit? Is the list changed? So it's a constant evaluation of where's the data. And like I always like to suggest to clients, the earlier you get started on this, the better, because then you're not coming to us around the holidays saying, all right, we need to update something. If you start reviewing this data in September, that's always a way to ensure accuracy and in timeliness of this information being submitted. You can move on to the next slide, please.
When it comes to top reasons that FDA would actually stop you, there's a great blog that we have posted that actually comes from FDA. So you'll get this when you get the PowerPoint with top reasons for detentions. And it goes through the 4 main categories for food, cosmetics, medical devices, and drugs. And you'll see that labeling issues and registration issues, not having a US agent, not having appropriate registrations, top issues that US Customs and US FDA will stop a good if it doesn't pass these tests. When it comes to the next couple of slides, in summary, for everything that we talked about with US Customs is what are we really dealing with here and what's your audit checklist, right? Your checklist as an importer is you need to use reasonable care. And now we have a whole lot of acronyms. We speak in acronyms. So now you're going to know IPR is intellectual property rights. HTS is your harmonized tariff schedule. COO is your country of origin. FTA is your free trade agreement, whether you're using it or not using it. Are you really eligible to use it? Have you stress tested? If customs audits you, are you using it appropriately? So how are you audit ready? Let's go to poll question number 6.
Okay, so I'm just going to launch our last poll question now. So does your company have its own account?
Perfect. So the reason we're going to talk about ACE is this is an amazing tool and many don't know that it exists or how to use it. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about. So we utilize ACE every day within our company and we'll talk about what it is and why. So I'm curious, how many of you even know what ACE is? How many of you are so good that not only do you know, you have your own importer account and you actually prepare your own reports and you audit your transactions via ACE? Perfect. Good. So 42% of you have your own ACE account. Wonderful. So for that 42%, are you actually getting reports from ACE on a regular basis? For those of you that aren't sure, ACE is the automated customs environment. And the idea behind it is it's a tool to not only communicate with US Customs. If Customs has questions for you, they would ask via ACE. And let me tell you, they're never friendly questions, so always beware of those. That's also in your top 10 tips cheat sheet. And when you have ACE reports, you get to choose different fields. You can set reports. You can get your ISF report card via ACE. You can see how your broker is doing and filing your importer security filings. You can get reports to look at your history. So it used to be you had to mail away and get copies of your import data and wait months to get it and spend $250. Your ACE reports are free. Your account is free. This is highly, highly recommended. So for the 47% of you that are unsure, we need to fix this. You do not have to rely on just your broker in providing data to Customs. Can help you. There's an easy process for us to request an account. We've requested hundreds of these, so we know very well what the process is and how to do it. Happy to help every size company in doing this. The idea is we request your account. We get you set up with ACE. You can be an importer and or an exporter. We go through the first report with you. We show you how to run the report, and we show you what all the fields mean. This is where you can get a harmonized tariff schedule database of all the HTSs that you use internally, right? We want to see what HTSs we've used for the last 5 years. Great. ACE is how you do it. I want to see all the manufacturers that we use. I want to see all the country of origins that we report. I want to see the manufacturer IDs reported to customs. I want to see the amount of duty we've paid, the amount of China tariffs we've paid. All those juicy details are in your ACE reports, which are wonderful ways to audit. So when you go to what you should be auditing in the first place, you should be thinking about what customs priorities are. Customs cares about intellectual property rights. They care about import safety. They care about revenue. They care about trade agreements and making sure they're not being abused. They care about anti-dumping like we talked about. They care about agricultural safety. So wood packing materials is a major issue we've seen a lot of penalties on. Utilize ACE to see what you're actually reporting to customs and verify its authenticity. Prepare a mini audit. A mini audit would be setting up an ACE account, getting your ACE report, picking transactions via the ACE report, reviewing your physical entry documents against the ACE report and looking for inconsistencies. Discuss with counsel when necessary. Easily set this up, set up a mini audit. If customs has questions for you, like this request for information, this is customs starting a mini audit on your company. Not a good thing. If you ever get this, it's a very bad thing because it means customs is not happy with what they're seeing, and they could start a world of hurt if you don't answer this appropriately. The people who don't take requests for information seriously and just answer them as if it's any other simple request and you just respond to customs, it's a disaster. If they're asking you questions via request for information, they're not happy with you. So you have to be very specific and very clear on why you are using reasonable care and why there is no issue with your importation. The best thing you want to do is close it out. And that's also on your top 10 tips cheat sheet, is what to do if you get a 28 or 29. So some suggested reading for you is your top 10 tips. Why you need your own ACE account is one of the articles we've put together for you. The top reasons FDA will detain your products. And we've given you the article on PPP imports during COVID that has your cheat sheet on classifications as well. I know we've talked about a whole lot today, and of course it is 12. So if you do have questions, our next slides, 36, 37, they have our contact information as well. So for those of you that do have to go, we do respect your time. And if you would love to ask us questions, feel free to utilize my email there or David's email on the next slide as well. So you have our contact information. I'm Jen at diaztradelaw.com. Feel free to email me. Happy to communicate with you and answer any questions that you have. And for those of you that do have a couple extra minutes that have some questions, I'm happy to stay on a few minutes over. So sorry, lawyers talk a lot. It's one of our weaknesses. We can't be perfect, right?
So do Wilson's.
There you go.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Jen and David, for all of this information today. And thank you to all the participants. We did have several questions come through. So, since it is over 12, we can address maybe one or two of them now. And then the rest we will follow up with you individually.
Sounds good.
So, first question that we got is, whose rulings take precedence, the FDA or the FTC, like with the L'Oreal example?
It's actually both, and it's not necessarily one over the other. It's more so the truth. It's the truth is what takes precedence. It's both of them care about truthfulness and not being misleading. So technically, both of them have separate but equal and distinct requirements, and you could be penalized by both equally, which is really annoying, and making sure that you have the right data in place and your claims itself can be substantiated, because it's not one over another. It's not like FTC will tell FDA, no, you shouldn't be doing this. It doesn't work that way. Each agency is independent and can issue enforcement independently.
Great. Okay.
Some more hefty than others, right? It might not necessarily be a monetary penalty that is really affecting us. So yeah.
So smart and so true, because FDA has really good tools to help put you out of business, like import alerts, warning letters, public shamings, FDA has very, very good tools to help really mess up your imports as well, whereas FTC does the public shaming and fines more so than FDA does, but FDA will help make sure that all of your imports are delayed, which could really hurt and or cost you your business.
Next question. Is the supplier responsible to tell, I guess, the buyer, the company that now has it, who the country of origin was?
No, unfortunately. So what we talked about today is liability for all of those things that we talked about today. 100% rests with the importer. So although the importer may ask the supplier, and the importer should, so really good importers, they don't only ask, but they audit the suppliers. They physically go to the suppliers. And in times of COVID where you can't, you have local companies, for example, audit in the same country. And or, if you buy from Walmart or you sell to Walmart, for example, you bet Walmart has vendors that they send out to all of your suppliers to ensure that your suppliers itself can meet specifications when you want to sell to Walmart. You should have no different standards in place. Obviously, not everybody is a Walmart. But for example, if I buy from David and David says, yeah, I make the product in Taiwan, you've got to ask questions because you're like, I really think it's probably China. You have a suspicion, you're probably right. So David, great. Where do you source your ingredients from? Oh, China, great. Where is the product transformed? Oh, China. So in China, they send you a final product to Taiwan, and in Taiwan, you relabel it, made in Taiwan. Yeah, that's how it's done. Oh, so it's really not a product of Taiwan. Well, but I put a label on it that says it is. Great. So you have to do your own homework and digging when you talk to your supplier, and some suppliers don't want to give you that type of intel. Sometimes you can't blame them for not wanting to give away their secret sauce, but if customs audits, they're going to audit you, the importer. They don't have, customs has no power over an overseas supplier, but what customs has, which I alluded to at the beginning, was a bond. That bond from the importer is your hook, and that's customs hook on you, the importer. So if there's a mess up with your import transactions, customs grabs hold of that bond and says, you, the importer, you're breaching your bond with me, customs, and I, customs, have a duty loss, for example, and that's how they get after you and or your surety, the company that supplies you your bond. Bottom line, importers are 100% liable, to use reasonable care in regards to their classification, valuation, country of origin, and the processes that you have in place to verify the authenticity of what you report to customs are 100% you, the importer's problem. So the reasonable care checklist has some great tools on questions that you should be asking your suppliers and questions that you should be asking internally to make sure that you're reporting the right information to customs, because only the importer gets in trouble with customs if that's wrong.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Sure.
Again, we did go a little bit over, so the rest of these questions, we will get back to you individually and make sure that we get them answered for you. And if anyone has any additional questions, as Jennifer mentioned, you can certainly email either Diaz Trade Law or Reed Tech, and we'll make sure that we get them handled for you. And we will be sending out a copy of the presentation, so you'll definitely have all that contact information as well as links to some of the resources that Jennifer had mentioned. So again, thank you both for speaking today. Thank you to all of our attendees.
Hopefully everybody learned today and enjoyed it. And if you did, would love to hear about it. Would greatly appreciate your feedback. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer and Aaron. Thanks again for the platform to help educate our clients and industry.